I sometimes jokingly say your dev job is actually becoming an ops job. So in the old days, I was receiving WAR files, jar files, whatever packages they were sending to me, and I had to deploy this as a sysadmin. I had no intimate knowledge about what the code was doing, and still I was responsible to do kind of the operations. Now it's very similar to the AI. The AI is doing a lot of coding. I don't maybe understand, and I haven't gone through the thinking process, but I'll still be the person who is in charge and needs to take like the heat when it isn't working.
Hello, and welcome to Hangar DX. This is a podcast about developer experience and how engineering teams solve productivity challenges at scale. I'm your host, Ankit Jain, co-founder of Aviator. At Aviator, we are building a multiplayer AI coding platform that helps you share some of the best practices with your team. Today, I am very excited to talk to none other than Patrick, the Godfather of DevOps, also the author of DevOps Handbook, and now one of the core managers of AI native dev. Patrick, please, I will not do justice introducing you, so please introduce yourself for us, for the audience.
I think you said most of the things, Ankit, and thanks for having me on the podcast. Yes, I have that history on DevOps that people haunt me for. I've been around the industry for a long time, so every time there's like something new emerging, I look at the patterns and how it can improve our craft, whether that's mobile, cloud, or the early days of internet. And now it happens to be AI. I'm always excited to work on what's emerging, and you can call this the shiny new thing syndrome, but I think it is more about the learning that I'm in for it. Like, what is new, how do we have to adapt ourselves, and how is it actually improving our jobs? So that's me.
Amazing. Do you want to also share a bit about AI native dev?
Sure. Yeah. As I am learning, I try to share the learning, and I also kind of look for stories from other people. And the best way to do this is in the community. And in the past, I've done this with a community called DevOps Days around DevOps, and kind of that sparked something. And now, recently, in the beginning of the year, I joined a community called the AI Native Dev, where we bring the news around what is changing in the industry, what we can do there. And I write some articles. I have some content creation. We have a podcast like yours. We're running an event soon in New York in November. But I think what sets us a little bit different is that we're solely focusing on software delivery with AI. A lot of events, a lot of other things, they come a little bit with their baggage, like either, they come from the data side, they come from the infra side, they come from the coding language, and they kind of have to appease like the old audience and the new audience. And kind of that's the cool thing about AI native dev, is that we're solely focused on kind of the new emerging things, obviously to translate it back, but that's kind of what is exciting. And so to talk a little bit, some would call me an evangelist, but what's in a name, is just sharing the stories. And I think what's nice is that, similar to DevOps, there was the hashtag DevOps, right? Right. But that was kind of the rally cry where you could find the initial stories under. And this is now what we try to do a little bit with AI native dev as the term. For good and for bad, it will kind of be obsolete like in a couple of years. It doesn't matter. Think of this as where you share your knowledge right now in the industry of this emerging new trend.
Amazing. You've been part of this DevOps movement, and now in a way we are going through this almost like an AI movement. Are there any kind of like parallel similarities, learnings from last time, or like even differences that you're seeing in these kind of patterns for software delivery?
Sure. Already alluded to that a little bit. Like whenever there's new technology, there's a bunch of people who kind of like go all in to this tech, and there's a people who are more skeptical and more like averse to any change. So the same thing is here. Will it solve us? You have the believers who say, I'm going to go all in on AI. It's going to solve like all world problems. And the other ones, I can still do it better than the AI, and that's fine. So that has been a constant with new technology. There were a lot of naysayers in the beginning of DevOps, like it's insane, 10 deploys a day. Who would do that? Like crazy stuff. And then eventually we got there. And serverless. Oh, it still runs on computers. Rah, rah, rah. And so that skepticism is always there. I think that's the way that I deal with it. Is I go with I take note of all the criticism, and then I kind of lean into it. And the reason why I lean into it is to almost overuse it, to start understanding where it is not applicable. Same thing with DevOps. There are cases where it doesn't make sense in the way that people think about this. And that's kind of like finding those limitations is similar. What is different is that the speed of the introduction of a new technology over the years has gone faster and faster. And like, I haven't witnessed this like ID to roll out to a chat GPT used by millions of people that fast, right? So that's definitely a differentiator, which leaves less time for maturing ideas. And it's like, oh, what is new today is all tomorrow. So that stabilizing factor is definitely kind of something that is annoying for people in that chaotic period. And we might still be in there for a couple of years until it settles. But it was the same thing in DevOps, like 17 different tools, and everybody's trying to claim the market, and we're trying to kind of make this work. Where there's a certain interest in that, we brought with DevOps a lot of automation and things that we didn't want to do ourselves, and kind of like, kept better at it. And the saying was, if you do it more often, you become better at this. It's almost like that training mantra. And I think that's been great, but it was only one part of the journey. Is kind of like getting things out there. And so it's similar to what people do with AI. They're like, especially in the coding fact is, we're also focused around like code generation. That's the next cool thing, and we want to make it better. We want to make it more reliable. Think of this as your first deployment, and you kind of like do this faster and faster. What we're a little bit missing right now is the testing, which is still a pain because there needs to be a review, and we can't like rely on a non-deterministic thing without any review. So that's kind of where, let's say, CI/CD and testing has a parallel. It's not just about like infrastructure as code and doing like your bash scripts better. It was about that testing. And then once kind of you have that testing, going to production was one of the things. Like, how do we do this? Still, people are unsure how to monitor this in production. We have now better ways, but that's kind of emerging as a solution and guardrails in the system. And then if I kind of draw the parallel, almost when we got so good at DevOps that everything run every day reliably, we were able to have outages, right? So we didn't know what was happening. So observability, still looking for that part on AI coding. Observability, is it different? Is it the same? And then we had chaos engineering, and the main takeaway for me is that you'll still have to train yourself, even if everything is done by some automation. But because when it fails, it's your job to kind of like fix it. And so that's kind of like a similar part that I see us going more in AI as an automator or as a tool that will probably go through similar phases to this. But the first thing is making it work repeatedly, and that's where a lot of companies are in. Let's try to make that first step before we think about like even security and reliability. So, similar path there.
Nice. Okay, that was a lot to unpack. I would probably start with one thing that you mentioned, kind of like caught my eye during the DevOps movement. There was, some folks who were champions and like helped improve like the infrastructure and kind of like got to continuous delivery or like deploying multiple times. But for a typical software engineer, their day-to-day was not as much impacted. Obviously, there was a whole idea of DevOps mindset, which is like every software developer needs to think, what is the impact going to be of their changes into the system. But compared to that, I feel like with AI, it's the thing that you mentioned is, okay, there are some people who are using it. There's some people who are mostly, indifferent or don't want to use it. How do you see this would play out? Like, because in a way we are changing significantly how your day-to-day software development happens, which I feel is a little bit different from how the DevOps movement happened.
Yeah. So I think you're right in a way that the deployment was maybe not everybody was worrying about this because it was still that silo thing and somebody else would do it. But good software developers did care about these things. They did care about what end users were doing. They did care about monitoring. They did care about like having to solve problems in production under pressure. So it was not just about like building your Kubernetes or like spinning up your AWS instances. It's generally the care of the software. And I think that's still the same whether you use AI or traditional coding. Like people who care, that's kind of like what matters. And let's say the abstraction layer with AI might have been different. Is what you see a shift is that I'm not typing anymore the code. I'm just instructing the thing how to do the code. So there's a level of kind of indirection, but I still need to know what good looks like. So in a certain way, I still need that knowledge to do the review. Not everybody agrees, and then you have like vibe coding is maybe not the term, but I often refer to it as YOLO mode, where you just accept all the things, because vibe coding is a different story. There's like good like reasons to do vibe coding in exploratory things, but so kind of your role is changing, and I sometimes jokingly say your dev job is actually becoming an ops job. So in the old days, I was receiving WAR files, jar files, whatever packages they were sending to me, and I had to deploy this as a sysadmin. I had no intimate knowledge about what the code was doing, and still I was responsible to do kind of the operations. Now it's very similar to the AI. The AI is doing a lot of coding. I don't maybe understand, and I haven't gone through the thinking process, but I'll still be the person who is in charge and needs to take like the heat when it isn't working. So in that way, we're moving a little bit to becoming more ops, where DevOps was maybe like putting a little bit more ops into the dev people. So in that kind of way, it is changing, and we're learning, right? It is also slower at times, which is another kind of difference. If I have to tell somebody else to do it all the time, it might be slower than me doing it in certain cases. In other cases, like it might help me speed up. So kind of that balance is also kind of important. It's knowing when to automate and what to do yourself. It was very similar to, I'm going to automate all the things with DevOps. Good luck. But there is like a discussion to be had, like, is it still economically feasible to do this? Or are you just doing automation for the sake of automation? Maybe it's best handled differently there. So you see kind of the same questions come up when people do the coding. But I have a blog post which is called the 4 AI native dev patterns, and the first one is actually going from producing the code, producer, to kind of reviewer or manager of that code. And that's the same thing. So now I have to manage and say, you're good. Like I'm going to give you some hints. This is actually what I want. I'm going to worry about the cost, about all the things. So that's kind of like a shift that's definitely going on there.
Very cool. I actually have this document also open in front of me, the 4 patterns of AI native developer. And I was going to actually ask about that as well. If AI is writing code, we are moving to a place where ownership becomes a little bit complicated, right? So if AI is writing code, then technically the person in your case, right, from we are moving from producers to managers. So that manager, or like that developer who's managing the agents, becomes the de facto owner of this code, right? Like they're sort of like the co-responsible person. But what happens to code reviews? Because in the old ways of writing code, there is a developer writing code and somebody else saying, yes, this makes sense or doesn't make sense. And now we're moving to a place where if AI agents write code, does that mean we need like 2 additional reviews on top of it to at least have like 2 humans reviewing it? Or do you think it's going to be a world where AI writes code and there's one developer who owns the code now, approves it, and we move on?
Yeah. I think it's all a matter of risk, right? Going to production, you would still have to review the code as a human. Now, the practice of having somebody else review it is a hardening step. Like, I have an opinion, I can spot things, or something else can spot things. Now, we can also ask AI to review the code or maybe ask a different model. So that's also second opinion. But whether your team operates under the principle of well, I have to, like whoever writes it, the approval needs to be somebody else, I think that still stands. But if it is blocking you or you are more senior or something, then not, right? So I always see it as how much kind of trust do you put in this? Whether you trust yourself, your colleagues or not. Some people trust themselves, some people don't trust themselves. So I think the practice is still valid, but it might also be similar to the code. It might also be more assisted, or kind of like it catches certain bugs or certain things according to your guidelines that it doesn't do that. Whether you apply or do reviews or deploy straight into prod, that's your problem, right? Your appetite for risk is that what is determining that. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm saying it all is related to risk, and that's it's kind of the whole problem. Is I might deploy something that I know is not having an impact, and within DevOps, we started out in a world where we had a big monolith thing running, right? So any change would have a big potential impact on this. Then we moved to microservices and we kind of distributed the risk by saying, hey, if we do something in the front end, right? Okay, that's fine. We easy, fast, redeploy, it doesn't matter, limited impact. Backend services, microservices, kill one, do this. Data changes, oh my God, you do not want to do that like straight away, right? So it's just giving you an indication of like what's your risk level. Now, that is just something that you kind of need to define. And I will also think that AI is probably going to change part of our architecture in like how it determines what the risk is. But like the current LLMs, for example, they want to write everything in one file, right? That's because the code generation has been trained like that. But we'll see kind of improvements that say, well, split this up, and I want to have modularity. I want to have like reusability of components. So those are things further down the line, but I think they will come because of that risk and the deployment. So.
Right. I think there's also whole conversations going on these days around context engineering and kind of like the whole spectrum in development where you kind of like define a lot of these rules in documents or information that you pass as context to the LLM so that it can actually produce code which is controlled by certain constraints that you're defining in the docs.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of aligning yourself with the model, and also specifications help align humans. I think it's a false thing right now to believe that if I write a spec, that my LLM is always going to stick to whatever I write, right? So it's similar to humans. You cannot guarantee that is happening.
Right.
So you need a kind of similar thing. But it definitely helps into not repeating yourself, writing this up, keeping this available at every request. So that's definitely an improvement, and it's a way of structuring things. There are some funny things with specs, though. Coming from the time also where like UML and big upfront designs, some might say that specs are a big upfront design. So also these pieces need to be more modular and kind of reviewable. And in the past, when humans were doing requirements, you're all somewhere in a Google Doc and trying to type and comment. There's one person who says yes, no, maybe the person writing, or again, ownership of that piece. That's important. But what you see is that those kind of like specs in bigger organizations often contain politics. Like we'll say this in the spec, but actually in reality, this is what's happening. So kind of like that's one thing. And then there's conflicting specs. The security says, you shall not pass and all these requirements. And the business says, well, we're okay with the risk. Let's do it. So kind of those reconciliations also need to happen. So it's not as simple as, of course, on the individual developer level, maybe you can say, I'm the business owner, I write what I want and I distribute this. But it becomes more complex if you are actually in a team or in a context of a bigger organization to deal with that. But it's a great way of not doing it verbally, having something written. And I remember, when two engineers are arguing about anything technical, my trick is actually, let's move to a whiteboard, right? Because the trick is they focus on the whiteboard. It becomes neutral terrain. It's not like one engineer against the other. And so the specs do something similar, and they kind of guide you to, oh, we're updating spec. We're not having an argument, right? So this is kind of like that. So I think it's going to work like quite similar. So collaboration around specs and the writing of specs is very useful, and is still kind of maturing in the field as well.
Very cool. So I'm still on your document for 4 patterns. And one of the things which still kind of like struck me out was like your pattern number 3, which is from delivery to discovery. And you talk about essentially the cost of experimentation is going down, right? So kind of like you can do a lot more experiments or prototypes with AI. Couple of questions related to that might be worth surfacing. One is like you already kind of like mentioned, like what is the impact of that looks on delivery? So it's kind of like your CI/CD systems, are they getting impacted significantly? And I think sort of like maybe a little bit more hot take or meta take is code going to remain the same linear way that we see today? Right, kind of like your Git history generally sort of like almost linear, and your code evolves in that direction. Versus if you're running constant experimentations, maybe it's sort of like think of this as like deploying from a different branch every time to kind of like run experiments. Do you see maybe the code structure or like how we think about the evolution of code will change as well?
Yeah, good question. I think initially a lot of people think experimentation in a way that like every feature branch is an experiment, right? Whether we kind of are able to do this. And with all the DevOps automation, we got maybe some per feature branch environment. So we didn't use like a single CI system. We can run those in parallel. I mean, it's still rare, but people have that pattern that they're able to do this, especially in the front end. You can have like multiple versions quite easily next to each other. It often had to do with the focus of the developer. Like, why would I is a feature an experiment? Well, in a way, yes, no. But what I meant with kind of the discovery is, what do I actually need to build? But the other thing that we know with feature branches would be like, okay, we know what to build, but kind of we have a way that we might do it, and hopefully the impact is lower, right? So they're all kind of experiments in a certain way. If you think of a tool called Lovable, right? Give me 2 different versions of the UI. It's equally effort for the AI to do that, and I get the option. So before I actually do the feature merge, I ask AI to do a couple of feature branches on its own, right? So that's kind of a certain discovery. Now, that's good on like, hey, can you give me another algorithm? Can you build me 2 variations on performance? Maybe use 2 different libraries, kind of like technical variations. UI variations we could do as well. Now, what kind of that ties into is the concept of the vibe coding, where you say, I'm just going to accept it for a while. Like, I'm not committing to main or even the feature branch, but I'm working on this like locally, and I have different options. And what you found is, if you've ever done like exploratory testing, there's the belief that people, I'm just going to write all the tests, right? And we're good. Guess what? You can't write all the tests. It's just much costly as kind of like deploying all the things. Like, there are kind of like certain false mantras. But if I'm kind of experimenting, this is you learning by exploratory YOLO coding. Oh, I didn't think it's true. The button needs to be there, or actually it's not that handy as I thought it was on the UI, or actually I need another field in my databasing. So kind of that exploratory thing is currently way more valuable than a pipeline that we've done for years that still runs. I'm not saying delivery is not important, but I think we got a lot more opportunity to now do kind of exploratory things. So that's way: technical exploration, business functionality exploration. There's different ways that people are trying to do this in parallel. Like we do with feature branches, they do it maybe with Git work trees to parallelize things. Now the problem then becomes, if we ask you to do multiple things, how do we split this up? Like, much like a product owner splits up features, like you backend, oh, that's probably not overlapping. It has an idea on the architecture, so the different features don't like overlap on each other too much. And it's the same problem the planners with AI have if they run things in parallel. Like, oh, we don't know. Maybe the one feature branch will not merge with the other. Maybe, it's conflicting requirements. So it's definitely like a point of attention right now that is not just parallel planning, here's all my features or what I do, but that breakdown is now also helped by AI by saying, I think this is the plan. Let's go through it step by step. Then you have the plan. You review this. So another review, not the code review, but the plan review, which we kind of do in our like sprint reviews. And then we kind of have the AI coding. Then we do the review and the merge, and then we kind of go to pod. So that's where it is assisting us. And the delivery, if you have a pipeline, it's the least of your worries in the process right now.
Interesting. You're saying most of this exploration and experimentation generally will be more towards like shift left, like left toward side of the development. So even before it gets into the review phase, like the code review phase, we will have like mostly made the decisions on which experiments are.
Yeah. If I call the first pattern from kind of producer to manager, that was about I know what to build, and then somebody builds it, and I need to manage that. Right. The experimentation is actually I want to find out what I need to build, what is actually useful, what my customers are asking for, and how I should do it. And then I can go into the phase, okay, I got my specs, please do. So kind of those are things hand in hand. And we're tying this back to the senior developer was not just about getting its code into production with a review. That actually would go closer to the product owner. Okay, we're going to discuss what we need to build with you. We need user input. We need feedback. So that's what a senior developer also does. And now we have, cheaper ways of doing this in parallel. And I get to choose. What is it? Do we need to do this? Do we need to do that? And the same actually is also for support. Mm-hmm. Support comes in. Let me find like 5 possible solutions for the problem. Like, you would not be able to do that as a human, but you can easily have your AI generate 5 options for you at the same time.
Very cool. Yeah, in a way, I feel like many of these functions in large organizations will start getting blurry in the sense that the responsibilities will overlap now in terms of like how do we understand the requirements. Like product managers can also do a lot of jobs which now software engineering are also responsible for. Which kind of brings to like maybe, I know, Patrick, we don't get people like you every day on this podcast. I want to cover like some of the hot takes that I had, or like at least some thoughts I had on this area. So first, I'm going to obviously start with DORA metrics. This is something which has guided us for last 10 years, right? Like for a while, and now software engineering is changing very rapidly. So are DORA metrics still relevant?
I'll ask you the question in return. Do you still want to deploy to production with end users?
Okay. Yeah, of course.
Answers, right? Because the DORA metrics are all about like getting things out to the user in a reliable way, and so they still matter. I see no reason why not to do it. You always have the odd person who says like, I don't care, like, but you have to deliver on all kind of the 4 metrics to have like a performant organization. You need to be fail safe. You need to be thinking about those things as well. So they're still relevant. And I know what it is when people think the whatever has an old term is not, useful anymore. But anyway, it still makes sense in this world.
Interesting. Do you think like AI will change any of those metrics significantly? I mean, I feel like kind of maybe lead time for changes is possibly changing a little bit.
Yes, but then again, like imagine it producing 10 times as much faster code. Good luck with the review. Did that speed up? So anyway, so it's a question, right? So That's still to be how we can break that down to actually get to that. And so writing specs, getting humans consensus, good luck, right? So certain things are not there like just automated, but it's definitely like a speed up of things.
Very cool. Okay, so given that AI is writing more code and like also these days like collaborating on the specs, where should humans still be making decisions versus letting AI automation handle it?
Yeah. It's hard to say. So in the creativity, you want them to be at a certain way creative. When I wanted to generate options, like things that I've never thought of. If I do micromanagement, it's only going to do what I tell it to do. So in that way, you want it to be like, giving me options. Now, making the decision, which option, maybe you can postpone it with feature flags, multiple solutions in the future. Okay, that's fair enough. Like we're getting this into a customer feedback loop. Doing the code changes and the data changes, I'd still kind of do this yourself. Like I cannot, have this done by AI right now. Even with certain risks, it's going to be tough to do it. AI for getting feedback again from production, definitely making a decision on what to do. Yes, in certain cases you can. So and that's probably more of the AI ops and less on the Gen AI thing. If you have certain trends, you can do scaling. If he sees certain like known problems sets, I can make some certain actions automatically. But it's always going to be like, if my action is going to be a big impact on risk, are you going to do it by the AI, or do you need to make that decision yourself?
Interesting. Okay, and I know we covered a little bit about GitOps and CI/CD. Do you envision sort of like incident response and the management of incidents, rollbacks, deployments? Are those going to be changed with AI?
So the rollback system seems to be similar right now. If I do have a change, I roll back the code, obviously with the same problems as data rollbacks and kind of those things. I think it does improve situational awareness, like what happened on all the systems, like making summaries on those. You could still say, I have to verify all those things, but at a certain level, you kind of know your system, and that's important. In all the things, when you do a review, you have to know what good looks like. So if it suggests something or that doesn't feel right, you kind of need to know in that perspective. But yeah, I can help it like improve the documentation. I can have it like test multiple like solutions, definitely things. But the person saying yes, no, probably still a human person. And then kind of reducing that cognitive load of doing that review is probably the next bottleneck that we're trying to solve.
Interesting. So just to understand or like rephrase some of the things you're saying is for incident response, maybe AI can still help with a lot of investigations, but eventually if you are to roll back or kind of like deploy yes, no, those decisions we still want humans to make.
Yeah, again, depending on the risk, if I can roll back and that's safe for the users,
Mm-hmm.
you should probably, that's okay. But it's like saying your intern, you can twist this knob. Yes, you can do it. Nothing harm really. So yeah, so that's where architecture comes in again.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So obviously one maybe last question on this would be, how do you imagine software engineering would look like in a couple of years?
Yeah, the crystal ball question, right? So I think it's more, I mentioned, we're focused on the coding. Let's hope we get the coding up to a level that's kind of like acceptable, not too hallucinating. In my opinion, we'll move to the review system, which is going to prove way harder to do it. And like the way that I started thinking about this is, if we now having a CI/CD pipeline that kind of merges it from different developers, what you see is that CI/CD loop is actually happening almost internally per developer on their own agent systems before they commit. So it's almost like a chain of CI/CD systems that kind of combine. So do we still need the central one, or kind of like, can we get just like faster merges in? So that central thing. So it becomes a little bit like a swarm. Right? You put this in, I put this in. Oh no, you can't put it in right now. So maybe that's where it's heading.
Mhm.
I have no clue, but it will all depend on scaling the review process, to be honest. So
Interesting. So review process definitely will become is already becoming like the big bottleneck for many of the software
yeah,
development
yeah.
in the life
And
cycle.
maybe I'll throw you like one idea that I seen. It was Claude, I think. Claude, you did all this thing on coding. Can you prove it to me that it actually works? And then Claude started building a dashboard and kind of like convincing the end user to do it. So if you think about the vibe coding thing for building functionality, why can't the agent actually vibe code an app for you to do the review with the thing that you actually need to do the review? So if it adapts itself maybe to a certain visualization or comparing two instances or I don't know what, but I think there's some exploration of not having to deal with diffs to understand if it's actually working, right? So,
Right, right. I also feel like there will be a resurgence of the whole test-driven development, where you
yeah,
kind of like write your acceptance test first, and then let the AI agents be able to write code to match those acceptance
there's
criteria.
a certain funny thing happening in that what is actually good coding practices is actually also good for AI.
Yes.
So if I do tests, I know that AI is not like, skipping and removing pieces of the code that I didn't want to do it. Big upfront changes, AI actually likes it in smaller chunks, right? Oh, you want to do snapshotting and commits? Actually, that's also helpful. You want to write good documentation? Also helps the AI. So there's a lot of people that first said, "Oh, let's abandon and AI will do all the practices," and it turns out that we're actually, kind of dealing with this. And the same thing with technical debt. So imagine you have a code base that has like four conflicting naming schemes. Very bad for AI, getting very confused, same as a human. So if you fix that, it will actually be improving for the AI. So it's a funny thing to say, like, if you couldn't convince your boss about like good engineering practices, maybe try with the AI angle to say like, hey, it's very good for AI. It becomes more productive. So maybe they'll listen right now.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how once you remove coding as a bottleneck, all these other cracks that already existed in your systems start showing up and surfacing more.
True that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the bottleneck is moving. Typical, theory of constraints thing. Let's see where it goes.
So, Patrick, I think I've covered most of the things that I wanted to cover. Is there anything else you would want to share?
I think a lot of people ask me how is it changing the role of the DevOps person, and my answer to this is people are trying to build things around this, which is great, like infrastructure as code and improvement. That's fine, but I personally believe that we'll need to see how the dev pipeline is evolving before we actually rethink how DevOps would look like. And I'm not saying you cannot use AI right now in your DevOps pipeline for testing or other things, but it feels like if that process is changing from the dev, our delivery and kind of testing process will change as well. So it's a little bit too early to kind of like dig into that piece as well.
Very interesting. Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Patrick. This was an amazing, insightful conversation. I'm sure we can continue on for another hour just discussing many of these interesting patterns we are seeing and like all the anti patterns we are seeing as well. But unfortunately, we are out of time. So thank you again for joining us here. And thank you, everyone who was listening. If you're interested in developer experience or working in DevOps platform teams, join us at Hangar DX. This is our community, and we run podcasts. We also run off the record sessions. It's dx.community. And if you also want to learn more about AI native development, please also look up AI native dev. I will share the links also in the footnotes so people can find the community and learn about some of your work, Patrick.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah.